Hey, this is Christian Roldan,
and Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
and you're listening to
This is Nos Audietis. This episode of Nos Audietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Audietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Lodero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going to
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
That Porter says cheated!
You want to win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome to another episode of Nos Audietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today to help preview this Open Cup match against Phoenix Rising is Joe Lowry, friend of the show and editor. And what's your title at Backheeled?
Backheeled czar. I don't know. There's no business card. There's no business card out there. Sort of a, I guess, pick your own title situation. I don't know. We're helping steer the ship that everybody's rowing in over at Backheeled. It is great to be back. I had a blast last time, Jeremiah.
Good.
And the subject today is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. So you are, in addition to being one of the voices of American soccer, you are literally the voice of Phoenix Rising, or at least the color commentator for Phoenix Rising. You've gotten to know this team very well. They're your local team. That's right?
Yeah. Born and raised. Ooh, different meat analogy there. Born and raised out here in Phoenix. It's been so much fun getting to do the color stuff. It is. I truly love what we're building at Backheeled. As far as just like the thrill of doing something, like getting to do a little bit of TV stuff, even obviously on a very, very small time level, has been a genuine pleasure. Like it is still the coolest thing that I've probably ever done in my still short career. It's been an absolute blast.
Well, so you are probably the best person I could think of to talk to for a preview of Phoenix Rising. Let's get a quick overview. This is the defending USL Championship title holders. How do you when you're the USL Championship? It's not the champion. You don't win the championship.
It feels weird to say the USL Championship champions. I've heard a few different solutions to this. I've heard just USL champions and just sort of ignoring that League One exists.
Sure.
I tend to go with like winners of the USL Championship final or something along those lines. I mean, really any of these work. It's like my name's Joe, my real name's Joseph. Growing up I was Joey, and then if I'm in trouble I get full named. So it's like any of those work just fine.
Okay. Well, they are the defending champions of the USL Championship, and they come into this game, in an interesting place. We back when, I think a lot of Sounders fans will remember Phoenix Rising from the Defiance's USL Championship days, and at that point, Phoenix Rising was this juggernaut of a team. They just felt like they were. I feel like they set a points record, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was a lengthy historic win streak. Didier Drogba was in town. Solomon Asante was probably the best player in the second division. It was that era that you're remembering that led to the final against Louisville with Drogba that Phoenix lost a few years back. Like that era was very much both locally and I think in parts, in small bits and bursts nationally, like regarded as a real run. And like there was a little bit of buzz behind the club that honestly has not quite been gathered back, even with that title win against Charleston last fall. Like that was a great moment. The club accomplished something that they'd never accomplished before. But even with that, there is still sort of this real concrete difference in era. And I think in fear that opponents that maybe used to feel against Phoenix, that they should still be afraid because there's a lot of good players in this Rising team, but it's not quite the same at this point.
Yeah, I looked at the roster and I was sort of expecting to see a lot of MLS veterans or players who came from Europe but weren't quite, at the top levels of Europe. But when you look at the roster, it's a lot like Louisville's roster, which is not to say it's bad by any stretch, but it's a lot of USL sort of journeyman types. It's a lot of players that maybe had a cup of coffee with MLS, but weren't never MLS regulars. It's a lot of players that are lifelong pros. There's a lot of veterans, but not a lot of players who are about to break into something bigger is maybe the way I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. First is the players that you're describing, like the ones who have been in MLS for a while and have a lot of upward mobility. Those are just still really few and far between in the USL Championship. There are more players and we're seeing this with RSL. We're seeing this with Minnesota United. Carlos Harvey, who's been starting a couple of games for Minnesota United recently, former LA Galaxy player, was mostly a second team player for them, was Phoenix Rising's best defensive midfielder last year and makes the move up to MLS. So those players do exist. But it's much more ones that haven't really been tested in MLS that have the potential to go up. Because if you're good enough for an MLS roster, especially as the league expands, it's hard to drop down to that tier. You might go and test yourself over in Europe or whatever it is. But those players don't really exist. And even when you look at a roster like Louisville, a team that we were talking about before we started recording, a team that I think is pretty clearly stronger than Phoenix as things stand right now, they don't have a lot of those guys. So there are a few for Phoenix. Renzo Zambrano was once a Portland Timber. He is now the best midfielder, and I imagine will absolutely start this game for Danny Stone on Wednesday. You think about someone like Lawrence White, who will be suspended for this game, but was with Nashville for a stretch. Erickson Gallardo, former Toronto FC player, is really a reserve for this Rising team. He's much more of a second string guy at this point. So your overall assessment, I think, Jeremiah, is spot on. Rising don't have a ton of those guys. At the same time, there is talent in this team. Rocco Rios Novo is maybe the highest profile player that's here, has been with Argentina's U23s, likely not going to make the Olympics for Mascherano, but has been in camps and has played for Argentina's U23s before, which is a really, really impressive thing. This is the team that Thiago Almada has been playing for. So that puts a little bit into context there. He was not very good, frankly, with Atlanta United, is short for a goalkeeper, but has been excellent, was one of the absolute best shot stoppers in the championship last year. Didn't start, interestingly enough, the round of 32 U.S. Open Cup game for Phoenix against North Carolina because of the classic cup keeper thing. And I was on a show yesterday out here in the Valley sort of pondering, well, is Danny Stone going to stick with the number 2 goalkeeper, as many managers do for cup competitions? We see it all over the world. Or because this game very much could end in a penalty shootout, Seattle's last game against Louisville did. Do you want your best goalkeeper, your best penalty shootout shot stopper, who helped basically win you the championship final last year in penalties against Charleston in Charleston? You want that guy in the field. So there is talent here. But again, to go back to the first thing, this is also not the Phoenix Rising of 2019.
So let's go back to this previous game where in the Open Cup where Phoenix beat North Carolina Courage in overtime, right, or extra time, and or not North Carolina Courage, North Carolina FC. Yes, sorry, I apologize for that. But that was it was an interesting game. Lawrence White, who you mentioned, got red carded in that one. He's not going to be available in this game. Was there anything about the Open Cup? That was a kind of a weird game and was kind of a USL game. But was there anything that we can take away from that game specifically, or should we be looking at the broader picture of the Phoenix season?
Well, yes and yes, because I really think that match fits within the broader picture of the Phoenix season in that it's a midweek game. It was Rising's first midweek game of 2024. They travel across the country. They had a game against Detroit just a couple of days later. They were going to stay out on the eastern portion of the U.S. before coming back home. It was, in large respects, even a more difficult travel stretch than this will be for Phoenix, going from Phoenix to Seattle. And then I actually don't know if they're coming back to Phoenix before going to Indy or not. Doesn't really matter. But the point I'm getting to is Rising didn't really change a lot at a high level. The personnel changed. And I would expect to see a lot fewer personnel changes in the lineup against Seattle than we saw against North Carolina, because this is, against the Sounders, one of the biggest games in club history for Phoenix Rising. It sounds like a trivial sort of thing, a round of 16 cup game. Phoenix Rising has never been this far in the U.S. Open Cup before, ever. Even for all of their good seasons, this has never happened before. They do not get to play MLS opposition, even heavily rotated MLS opposition, as I'm sure we both expect from Brian Schmetzer. Like this doesn't happen. This absolutely doesn't happen. This is a big moment. So we will see a lot of continuity. And really, tactically, we saw a lot of continuity against North Carolina. Danny Stone, new manager, was on Juan Guerra's staff, and maybe a few folks know the name Juan Guerra. I would imagine most don't. He is now an assistant on Ben Olsen's staff with the Houston Dynamo in the Western Conference and MLS. The progression of managers has shifted a bit for Phoenix, but the style is very, very similar to what won them the championship last year. Ball dominant, not exclusively, but we will see Phoenix come out and possess for stretches, I'm certain, against Seattle at Starfire. They like to be in the 3-4-3 look. They play with sort of a very similar possession look to what Seattle do. It's a bit more fluid. It's a little bit more controlled in how they play with shorter passes and like trying to keep the ball on the ground, maybe a bit more than we see from Seattle. But there are a lot of similarities there. And they didn't shift that for the Open Cup. There was personnel that shifted in goal, a little bit in midfield, a couple of little injuries as well in that stretch. So there were some changes there. But by and large, that North Carolina game tells me that Phoenix obviously has the quality to advance and to, throw some punches here against different teams, but really that they know who they are. Phoenix know who they are as a club and don't seem particularly interested in changing that.
And so I guess broadly speaking, it's also similar setup wise tactically to Louisville, who also played this sort of possession heavy, and they did frankly dictate the game in the first round. The differentiating factors in the game ended up being sort of the Sounders making more of the chances they had, and then obviously just winning a penalty shootout. And I would imagine that Phoenix could also come out and with the similar attitude of saying, like, we're not going to change our game. This isn't, and my expectation is the Sounders will use a rotated lineup. I don't know how many regular starters or if there will be regular starters in the lineup. And so it seems to me that it's entirely plausible that Phoenix could come out and sort of with the attitude of, the game's going to be played on our terms. And it's not like they should be, Starfire isn't going to be some weird environment for them. It's going to be very similar to probably what they face in the USL Championship all the time.
Yeah. There's a lot of continuity in terms of the atmosphere as well. Like, it's not going to feel like this crazy, daunting sort of experience, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, right? Like, it undeniably takes a lot of the atmosphere out of it, and I think as a neutral is a huge bummer. As a spectator, I think it's super lame.
The Starfire experience is unique in its own way.
For sure.
They get enough people. Like, I've said this before, I would rather see the Sounders play in front of 3,000 at Starfire than
like 10 or whatever
at Lumen. And it's a better, that said, it does not feel the same as it would, even if it was 15 or 20,000 at Lumen.
Yeah, in a lot of respects, your point, Jeremiah, is spot on. I think about Phoenix just played on the road in Detroit, and Detroit have a great atmosphere, but it's something that these players have experienced before, many of them, and it will not feel super out of place, nor frankly will, I would imagine, the lineup that Brian Schmetzer is going to put out on the field. Like, I don't think you can look at that lineup that Seattle rolled out against Louisville and say, like, we are super scared of these players. Alex Roldan was the only regular starter who was in that 11. Atencio obviously is a good player. Like, Georgie is a promising young winger that I've really enjoyed getting to see play, but is super raw. Danny Musovski was probably the best player on the field in general, at least the most dangerous attacker on either side. And that will likely be the case as well on Wednesday against Phoenix. But like, the message from manager Danny Stone to these rising players should be like, guys, we can win this game. Like, we have every chance to win this game. We just picked up points against Detroit on the road. We just went to North Carolina in the last round. And sure, North Carolina FC, not a very good team in the USL Championship right now, but we've gone on the road recently and gotten results. There's no reason, realistically, why Phoenix couldn't do that, even if I don't think anybody would actually favor them here.
I totally agree. I think the USL, the gaps between, it's funny, and maybe this is an interesting point of conversation because you watch both of these things every day. Ben Olsen got a lot of attention for suggesting as like basically laughing off the idea that the USL Championship and MLS were even comparable in any way.
Sure.
But, here he was having lost in overtime to a USL Championship team. And I think we have to be realistic. The gap between good, not even the best, but just good USL Championship teams and fully reserve MLS squads is not so big as to guarantee anything. And it's no shame, frankly. You look at anywhere in the world where there are these cup competitions, there are upsets. it's not like a mark of shame where a lower division team beats a higher division team. And I sometimes think we get stuck in this discourse where it's either the gap between MLS and USL is so wide that it's worth laughing off a question, or that it's so small as to be irrelevant to the division. The divisions. And I think the truth is somewhere pretty far in between those two kind of like laughable extremes to me.
No doubt about it. And the reason why the Olsen comment went so, viral in our own little small niche Twitterverse is because of the tone and the timing, right?
Yes,
like
absolutely.
He comes off very, very poorly in that clip. He comes off like a sore loser, which he was in that moment. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And I thought John Morrissey, who does great work for us covering the USL, I truly think better than anybody for Backfield. His response to that clip that went around the Twitter sphere was basically, this mentality is why so many deserving players don't get a chance to move up. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Is you go out and talk to MLS decision makers, and by and large, they're not looking in the USL for talent. And I can understand a lot of that. I can. Like, you're not going to go shop in USL for your next veteran difference maker. That's probably not the right move. We don't see teams doing that from second divisions basically anywhere. We certainly don't see it in a closed system. It doesn't make a lot of sense. At the same time, if you want to look for two different categories of players, one that can help fill out your roster, because I think your point, Jeremiah, is spot on. The difference between players, I don't know, 16 through 20 or whatever, the bottom end of an MLS roster and the top end of a good USL championship roster is very, very small. I would
it's
still
about
tend
upside.
to,
More than it is about today's performance.
Absolutely. And that's the second category of players, right? You can go out there and look for guys who can fill out your squad. That's what Minnesota United did with Carlos Harvey. That makes sense. They sent Taniolo Ashei out on loan to San Antonio last year, and he was fantastic for them. Now he's back in and was supposed to be a depth option behind Timu Pukki and has been sort of stealing the spotlight for them. You can go and find the depth pieces with occasionally a twist of upside, or you can go do what RSL have done better than anybody in Major League Soccer and go find Diego Luna, who's going to be at the Olympics this summer with the U.S. In Paris, in France. And you can go find Fidel Barajas, who was a U.S. and it is a U.S. and Mexico youth international, who wasn't in the USL Championship final against Phoenix as a Charleston Battery player because he was off with Mexico on international duty. There's real talent here. And the Olsen quote, I think, came off poorly while he's still absolutely correct. If you're looking at these things holistically, if this is the Sounders' first team 11, even though everybody would agree right now, this Sounders team is sort of a shell of where they've been or where they even could be in 6 months from now. There's no competition. There's no USL team that can go out there and compete with that stuff. Soccer is a low scoring game. So it's possible that you could knock in an upset. We see Saudi Arabia top Argentina at a World Cup. And obviously Argentina is the better team. No one would argue that, but it's the timing and the tone of Olsen's comments. But when all of a sudden you're looking at players, I don't know, 13 through 24 in the Sounders squad or whatever it is, and you're looking at players 1 through 11, essentially in Phoenix Rising squad, you can sort of see how the championship side has a chance.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think the other thing to keep in mind is just that, the Sounders are out there signing, Tacoma Defiance players to their first team roster. These are third division players as well. Bradilio Rodriguez was someone that they, he hasn't played for the Sounders yet because of injury, but, he had a great season at USL champ or in MLS Next Pro. And the gap, but I certainly believe the gap between MLS Next Pro and USL Championship is pretty big too. But these are the idea that there's not talented players at the lower divisions of MLS is just sort of laughable. There are so many cracks that players can fall through. But if we're talking about resources, sure. The Sounders have a training facility that now is up there with some of the best in the world. I don't imagine Phoenix has anything close to that.
No.
That's where you're seeing, that's where maybe the comparisons are a little bit more, laughable for
you see the gaps. There's no doubt that the gaps are there. But the question is just how much do they matter in this particular situation? Exactly. And the answer is, well, if it's the lineup we saw against Louisville from Seattle, the difference is pretty negligible, because even you look at the bench, Brian Schmetzer didn't stack his bench. There weren't consistent MLS game changers. Well, I mean, there are questions about whether Seattle have any of those right now, regardless. But in general, there weren't those players.
No, there weren't MLS veterans
on the bench,
really on the
bench,
bench.
right? Yeah. So a huge question for Phoenix. And ultimately, I think the thing that will decide this game on Wednesday is how much does Brian Schmetzer care about this game? If the Sounders are thinking, hey, we're not thriving in the Western Conference and maybe an Open Cup trophy would feel really, really good right now, Phoenix should be really, really worried. If it's not that, then I think the odds shift much closer to, I don't know, we'll say 60-40 because the 10% swing there is maybe the home field side.
Yeah, I would agree with that. My expectation is that this will be a very competitive game and that it's going to be, hopefully fun to watch. And, maybe we'll get to see, I'm honestly, I'm excited to see Andrew Thomas as much as anybody. In case anyone from Phoenix is listening to this, Andrew Thomas put on quite a display against Louisville. He saved 3 penalties and then he kicked the winning. He made the winning kick and then ran around like a just completely unhinged celebration, which was just fun to watch. And other than that, I don't know how much one of the other players who I guess might be in this game that would be interesting to a neutral, Georgie Monongu, who he is a lot of flash. I don't know quite how much substance there is to his game, but he's fun to watch, especially in against a opponent who I imagine he matches up very well against.
Yes.
And so I think the Sounders will put some interesting talents out there. There'll be some things to watch. Stu Hawkins is a young center back who's probably going to get a good run out in this one. We might see Reed Baker Whiting. That would actually be a really interesting thing if the Sounders deem him ready to start. He's been sort of on a long road back from a hamstring injury last year. He is apparently the player who the Sounders still get the most inquiries about from foreign talents or foreign talent scouts. He can play on either the right or left side as a fullback. And then other than that, it's a lot of sort of more squad players that I would expect to see. I'm expecting Danny Musovsky to start. I'm expecting Paul Rothrock, Dylan Tevez, Danny Leyva, John Bell, Cody Baker. Those are some of the players who I would be expecting to start. Yeah. Another player who might get some time that is an interesting player to watch for, potentially for Sounders fans. Yeah, for Sounders fans, I suppose, is Kalani Kosa Rienzi. He was their first draft pick he was their first round draft pick this last year. Almost made the team out of training camp. Has been looking pretty good for Tacoma Defiance. He's a very athletic player. He was a center mid in college, but he's been moved out to right back. And I would say he has some real MLS potential. So there's some talents to watch for Sounders fans, potentially for Phoenix fans. But one thing I am always curious about, Phoenix is a market that is constantly brought up sort of on the periphery of potential MLS in the future. I don't remember if we've actually had any serious, if they've ever really put forward a serious expansion bid. But what's your projection of the future of professional soccer in Phoenix?
Yeah, that formal expansion bid has never come, certainly as far as I'm aware. It's funny that you asked that question because I was just talking with really the oracle out here in Phoenix of Phoenix Rising and in professional soccer. Owen Evans, who does a fantastic job, is one of the only people in American soccer, let alone lower division soccer, who is traveling to every away game and just puts in a ridiculous shift. He's truly incredible. And the Phoenix soccer market is beyond lucky to have him involved. I was just chatting with him last night about this very topic, basically. And the TLDR here is nobody knows. It's messy. Like Phoenix Rising have moved stadiums since they become Phoenix Rising, which was a rebrand, I think, back ahead of the 2017 season from Arizona United. They became Phoenix Rising. They have moved their stadium location 3 times. They were basically they were in Scottsdale. And then they were down in sort of South Chandler, and now they're in Central Phoenix. So this is their second season in Central Phoenix. The stadium situation is a legitimate problem. It has been, in my mind, the single largest hurdle to establishing a consistent and growing fan base in the Valley. You go out and talk to people, and I'll sort of tell them, this is what I do if they ask. And they'll be like, I know about Phoenix Rising. They still off the 202 and the 101. And you're like, no, they're down in Central Phoenix. And nobody knows. Like, nobody really understands going on, and it's made it very, very difficult for Phoenix to establish like a consistent budding group of people that come to their games and care about consuming coverage. And there's all sorts of problems about media coverage that I'm sure you and I could talk about for hours and hours and hours, and we don't need to do that here. But all that to say, the future is uncertain. They're currently in a situation where they have a bit more stability with their stadium. They don't own the land or anything along those lines. So there are still long-term questions. There are leases here, deals that have been signed, and they don't last forever. So, is Phoenix Rising going to stay where they are at 38th in Washington and Central Phoenix for a long time, like for as long as I'm doing this? It's not impossible. There are also, I think, other folks who probably would like to get their hands on that land, and we just lost the Arizona Coyotes to Utah recently. So it's an interesting topic around sports here in Phoenix. Phoenix Rising's not going anywhere anytime soon, right? They're not going to fade like San Diego Loyal faded, but they do have their own stadium challenges, at least as it relates to trying to have like people care about the team and care about the product. So MLS, I imagine, still is a possibility as well. It just takes the right person with the right pockets, right? And that's the thing that it seems to me that Phoenix has lacked. And by that I mean both like the city of Phoenix, because let's not kid ourselves, we don't often see these expansion teams go from USL to MLS, right? The branding changes and the other USL team dies, right? There was a team in St. Louis, a USL team in St. Louis before St. Louis City came into play, and they're not around anymore.
I guess it was
Diego. Those teams,
Minnesota, the last one.
I was thinking Cincinnati has got to be the last one, right? Nashville is probably the right answer. Never mind there. But like we don't see that anymore. Miami has a USL Championship team, and they have Inter Miami, but it's chaos at the USL Championship level. So there's a massive question about, is Phoenix going to get an MLS team at all? Is that limbo holding them back from making more long-term decisions to just accept that they should operate as a USL Championship club? There are far more questions as you look out 5, 10, 15 years from now about Phoenix Rising, frankly, than there are answers. And then you've got the whole women's soccer situation, where initially with the USL Women's Super League that was just launched, it's a Division I league coming on a European sort of calendar to American soccer. Phoenix Rising was one of the initial expansion teams in the Super League. And then they came out and said, actually, sorry, we can't do this. Like, we don't have it's not the right time for us to do it. Like, the infrastructure wasn't there. It's a huge question. Like, is women's soccer actually going to be sort of more of the future here? And I'm not sure. I don't know the answers to these questions, but there are, not for next year or the year after, probably even, 3 or 4 years from now, there aren't real questions about, what's going to happen in Phoenix. They're not going to get an MLS team in that time frame, but maybe they end up with one in a decade or a little bit less if MLS continues to expand, or maybe not. It's a strange time in a lot of ways to think ahead and look forward to what all the many possibilities that could end up happening here in the Valley.
Well, Joe, thank you again for joining us. People should know that if you are a subscriber at the advocate level or above on Sound at Heart, you get a free subscription to Backheeled. I find Backheeled to be an amazing resource. You've done a great job there, Joe.
Thank you.
It's been great creating this partnership with you and having some, trying to do some cross promotion, so to speak. But in this case, it was almost so obvious. It almost like missed me that we needed to have you on for this one. So, Joe, other than Backheeled,
sure.
You're also on the Total Soccer Show. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, unfortunately, they won't find me on the call for this Seattle Phoenix game as much as I would truly love it. We're only doing, myself and Killian McClatchy out here in Phoenix are doing the home games, so no Open Cup action this week. But if you're ever tuning into a Phoenix Rising game and maybe you want to adopt them as your USL Championship team because for some reason you don't watch enough soccer in your life, then you can find me at times on ESPN Plus or CBS Plus or wherever those games are these days. And then other than that, probably the safest bet is just to maybe toss a follow my way on Twitter at Joe C. Lowry. That's a good catch-all for you.
Very good. Well, Joe, thank you for doing this. I am Jeremiah Oshan signing off for Joe. This is Nos Adietes, and we will catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one.